Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Podcast, powered by First National. I am Adam Pawatic, sitting here with Aaron Cameron at the Edmonton Real Estate Forum. This is part of our speaker video series, and of course, we do want to thank our sponsor for that, Qualico Properties. Our first interview of the day, we've got Kalen Anderson, CEO, Urban Development Institute, Edmonton Region. Welcome, Kalen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Aaron and I spent the last 2 days just binging on everything Edmonton. You know, we were at the apartment conference yesterday, Edmonton conference today. It's a bit of a good news story, but we're going to expand on that quite a bit with Kalen today, as well as talk about the hot button issues, kind of dominating the market for how things could improve. But, we're not going to focus on negative all that much because there's a lot of positives right now in Edmonton. But to start off, just before we get into any of that, we'd love to hear your background, how you got into real estate, how you got to where you are today, and then of course, what UDI delivers to the market here.
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity to introduce myself. My background's in urban planning. So I did my planning education at McGill, and I started off in Quebec, and I realized quickly that, the jobs were in the West, and I moved back home. I grew up in Calgary, and I spent the bulk of my career actually with the city of Edmonton in a variety of different roles. But the last 7 years as a planning director of different types and stripes. And the final thing that I worked on, which I'm pretty proud of because it's now something I continue to work on, was the development of our city plan, which is our long range master plan for how we're going to double our population from 1 to 2 million and deal with everything that needs to come with that. So during the pandemic, I did a quick detour where I accepted a role as Vice President of Capital Planning with the National Capital Commission in Ottawa. And that was a wonderful role, really planning a capital worthy of the pride of all Canadians. What I did realize, though, was that the heartstrings of home were calling. So I really wanted to be home. And I actually have a really strong passion for housing. I didn't realize that it was that strong until I sort of stepped away from that space and realized, no, I really care about where people are going to find places to live. And it just so happened that the opportunity to join the Urban Development Institute came up at about that time. So I've been the CEO for 2.5 years, and it's been a really fun ride to get very integrated with the real estate community, not only in Edmonton, but of course in the province, and to click in nationally to figure out what's going on.
So how would you classify like the UDI mandate?
Well, our mandate is really to support, we're a members-driven organization. So we're a nonprofit, and our members are all private corporations. And when you think about how real estate happens within the local municipal space, the regulator is the municipality. So somebody needs to be able to speak up for and collaborate with and negotiate with the regulators. And so that's true at the local, provincial, and national levels. But I would say that when it comes to the nitty-gritty of the land use planning decisions that actually enable the development to start, that's very local. So the main purpose is advocacy, but of course networking, connections, business to business development, these are all critically important. So sometimes I kind of kid that that UDI's mandate is policy, politics, and parties, because it's a combination. That's my P3. And yeah, the politics of it is real. And we're always working with different mayors and councils and elected officials at the provincial level. So all in, it's about pulling ourselves together to advocate for the industry to ensure that we have the ability to grow, attract talent, and secure investment. As
a city planner, how often did you come across UDI?
All the time. Absolutely all the time. Top stakeholder, actually. When I was, if you're working on urban planning policy and you're not only contemplating, but integrating how development is going to respond to that, you're not really doing your job. So I was always, Edmonton's a pretty small community, pretty easy to get to know who's who. And absolutely critically important. And I would say that, that carries on across our whole region. It's a very, I think, broad strokes, a very collaborative kind of metro region.
So you knew what you were getting yourself into because you had basically seen that job in action from the other side.
Totally. Absolutely. And the interesting thing is that like a lot of the policies that I was, working on the other side of the gurney on, with city council, with community leagues, et cetera. Now I'm, trying to tackle those from the other end, which is the, how do they affect the investability, the reliability of our policies and our regulations. So it's pretty cool to have been able to experience planning and development. They're kind of peas in a pod, and when one gets too stuck into one piece and they don't understand their neighbor, you can really lose the plot.
They're kind of at odds, though, aren't they? A little bit. Like I was thinking about our own experience. We're a lender, right? We work for First National as lending, and on the opposite side, it's the same side, but on the opposite side is the equity side of the business. And we often have individuals come from an equity business to join the lending side, and we're both still investing in real estate, but they're very different approaches. And
You're saying oppositional?
no,
Is
I'm not. But I mean, the equity side is there's just this level of optimism and higher risk tolerance, right? Like rents will continue to increase, and everything will work out okay, and this will be fine. On the lending side, it's like, oh yeah, but what if it doesn't? And I want to make sure that I'm protected if that doesn't happen. So there is
our upside is capped at the interest rate,
right?
That's
yeah,
the
so
best we'll ever do on it. But downside risk is enormous.
You just, I think a lot of people that come to lending from the equity side have to relearn and are surprised at times. Have you had a similar experience? Because likely you've now, I don't want to call it the dark side, but kind of joined the dark side now, pushing the policies against the people you used to work for.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, policies are only any good if they actually affect change. So you can write down whatever you want on any piece of paper, but if you're not getting the results, or if you're having a negative unintended consequence, like it's a pointless policy. So I have had no problem personally integrating that thought process.
Like they don't hate you now. They're like, oh, you traitor.
No, I
Is it
mean,
oppositional? Yeah.
I mean, it's probably a bit more challenging to work with me because I know what the words mean, all of the words. Like magic.
You can't get BS, right? Is that what you're
Very
saying?
rarely,
Yeah.
very rarely. But that being said, the planning piece of real estate sector is just one of what I would say are like 8 major competencies. So I'm grateful that I have at least some kind of foothold to begin conversations. I'm not an expert in marketing. I'm not an expert in lending. I'm not an expert in all kinds of other, parts of this ecosystem. But at least the planning is good. So yeah, are they oppositional? I think they're in creative tension. And actually, bureaucracies and political processes are deliberately slow and painfully consultative. And then the business sector is sort of stereotypically fast and action oriented. So they moderate each other. I'm one of the things I really like about Edmonton, and I say this, I guess, a bit biased because I haven't spent time working in other markets, to be totally honest with you, but we do seem to be generally very pro-business and open. So when things are going wrong, we can at least have the conversations.
Isn't that one of the Alberta themes in general? Is more pro-business than the rest of the provinces? It's
I think without a doubt.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of a badge of honor.
Yeah, no, I mean we're admiring it over in Ontario, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So I assume then in a kind of pro-business environment that the local buy-in would be pretty significant to an organization like UDI. Like the local developers, owners, property investors, all the stakeholders, they're pretty supportive of the organization.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think we have quite a bit of the market share, if you will, but there are other players in the space which are really important, like NAOP, and we have an infill group called IDEA, and of course have BOMA. So we kind of joke a little bit, the different CEOs that were a bit of the G7 of real estate in the Edmonton metro. So but across all of our organizations, I'm sure that we have a very large market capture.
Underlying values too, I'm sure, between all those groups.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the biggest challenges to city change to be pro-business, quite frankly, if putting it that way, at least in my estimation, from the city of Toronto, which is where we reside, but I'm sure this is consistent across many different municipalities, is the resistance to development, is the resistance to rezoning, and that sort of, we call it NIMBYism. How is it that Alberta is able to get through that with seemingly less effort?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting paradox because, like, on paper, you would think Alberta is a lot more conservative on all kinds of dimensions, but in terms of the real estate environment we've created through our policy, it's like the most progressive in the country, which kind of seems at odds. Now, I won't say there's no NIMBYism in Alberta. Calgary just got through an 11-day public hearing to change one zone to allow a couple more types of housing. And they're still not through their decision. And of course, here too, I mean, there's been a lot of change that's happened. What I would say we've done really well in Edmonton is it's been quite incremental, but with a very laser focused objective. So, if the bottom line is that we all understand that we have, if we don't have enough migrants coming in, that's our number one goal, is to attract people here. And if we do have a lot of people coming in, which is currently what's going on, our goal is to house them. So we're always kind of rushing forward to meet the moment. Yeah, I think that's maybe.
Is that really just the official plan has sort of as of right areas that make it easier? You don't have to worry about this rezoning and bylaw amendments and all this stuff where NIMBYism can kind of get in there and wrench the process.
Yeah, I think our system's a lot different than for sure in Toronto and in Vancouver. I mean, every city is different, but we have a very clear official plan called the city plan. We also overhauled our entire zoning bylaw, which is called the land use bylaw in some other jurisdictions, which provides the as of right development rights that you can have on a parcel of land, and that's been significantly expanded. So, we don't need as much rezoning to happen. So I would say from a policy and plan, or from a planning permissions perspective, we're doing great. We're not done. We still have the same worries about development costs and charges escalating. There's still kind of always this tension with increasing policies, which are being kind of layered on to the development sector. But from a regulations perspective, I think we had a lot of little conversations for about 15 years straight. And now we're at a point where, people can definitely come out to public hearing, which they do, and protest, the development of a new high-rise tower or maybe even just townhousing next door. But the overwhelming general outcome is that development moves forward.
You mentioned in a previous role putting together the plan to try and take Edmonton from 1 million to 2 million. You're definitely in a flood of interprovincial migration right now, perhaps international too. So how far along the path is that plan that you would have worked on in your previous career?
Yeah, well, I think that we did something in hindsight that was just really quite prescient, which was we did not plan for population growth at certain years. And part of that was because Alberta is a boom bust economy. We're always up and down. When we're great, we're too great, and when we're bad, we're crying in our soup. So, thinking about how can we actually plan for the city we're going to be, we can just plan to double our population and outline everything that would need to happen to get us there, and then whatever timeline that takes, we'll just adapt to it. So that was the theory. Since we have approved that plan in 2020, the growth rate has been really high, like the highest in the country, and I think Alberta got a couple 100,000 in migrants just last year, and Edmonton's population alone has grown from 1 to 1.1 million in just a couple of years. So that's pretty astonishing. I think the pressure is going to have to be that the growth is coming a lot faster than I think we expected, which means we're going to have to ramp up on a lot of different dimensions. And instead of slowly plodding along to figure out, what are we going to do here and there, we're just going to have to kind of open everything up and welcome people to invest here and move here.
Otherwise, you end up the trap that cities like Toronto and Vancouver are in, where housing prices have skyrocketed at unimaginable rates, which then has the effect of slowing down net migration, I imagine.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, there's absolutely no denying that the cost of housing relative to the average family income and our tax rate is unparalleled. Like there is just more discretionary spending power in Alberta in general, and specifically in the big cities. So people are attracted to that, but then there's this temptation among municipal officials sometimes to layer on more expectations, which could slow development or make it more costly, and or to not open up the lands required, which could reduce supply. And as we know, the basic, just 101 of economics, if supply is slowed, especially in times of high growth, the prices will crank up. And we actually saw a pretty negative impact of that in Calgary about 5 or 6 years ago, when City Council decided under Mayor Nenshi to hold back on approving new lands for suburban development for a couple of years. And
what was the rationale behind that?
It was the idea that maybe there was environmental sustainability rationale, there was cost of growth rationale, just maybe planning preparedness rationale. But in the end, what happened was that now the delta between a house in Edmonton and Calgary is about $200,000. So it's the migration that's been coming into Alberta. I'll be honest, it's very biased towards Calgary. And I get it. It's big, beautiful, shiny city right next to the Rocky Mountains. I grew up there. I have a lot of love for Calgary. It has been taking the lion's share of growth. But now that we're at that kind of critical tipping point where the cost of housing is so different between Edmonton and Calgary, I think Edmonton really needs to buckle up, because we're probably going to be getting an even larger surge over the coming year and years.
Which will impact price of housing, cost of housing, and we've heard rents are rising fairly rapidly, not astronomically, but still quickly. Rent control is an easy way to get votes. Is that language coming up at all from any of the politicians?
Yep, it's been officially tabled by the opposition at the legislature to bring in rent control, and that's been, I think, soundly defeated by the party in charge, which is the UCP party. Industry does not favor rent control.
Well, of course. Well, I mean, one of the big attractions of Alberta from the rest of the country is that you're the only province that doesn't, or one of the few provinces that doesn't.
Yeah, and I mean, rent escalation, I mean, it's interesting because, on one hand, you need rents to increase to make the profitability of projects and their ongoing construction viable and attractive, but you also don't want it to be a runaway. So the one thing that has really, we've noticed in our big cities is that the vacancy rate has really diminished, which means that not all, I shouldn't exaggerate, but a good proportion of the migrants who are coming into our cities are arriving and they're renting. And then the next step, of course, is to buy. So it's kind of a delayed response. So I think, there's been a bit of kind of trepidation and confusion about, okay, we have all these migrants who have arrived, all these new Edmontonians, but why hasn't our housing market blown up yet? And I think it's just a delayed response.
Yeah, well, and that's a trap. I mean, be careful. Speaking from our experiences, when vacancy gets down really tight, I mean, one of the big controllers when you have no rental restrictions, rental controls, is that if you increase your rents too much, the tenants just vote with their feet and they leave and they go somewhere else where the rents are manageable. The problem we have, of course, we have a really tight rental market, is there's no place for them to go, and then all of a sudden, then you start getting more loud screams for rent control, right? So hence you need the zoning in place to make sure that the developers continue to build at a healthy rate, which I think you have, right? So it's a nice balance. I don't want to sound like a jerk when I say this, so I'm going to be really. I'm out of town, and we've spent a bunch of time all over the country. So this is with a view. I was in Halifax and Vancouver, and of course live in Toronto, but we've been all over the place this year and many years. And there's lots of us here at the Edmonton Real Estate Forum from all over the country. And so of course
it was a Toronto reunion in the hotel lobby.
Yeah, and this isn't just Torontonians, but and we're real estate people, so we love to make observations and be critical of the real estate environment and the built form and all that kind of stuff. And we were talking about the comparison between Calgary and Edmonton, which is just only natural here, right? The sort of the siblings. And you mentioned it. The Calgary is kind of this nice shiny object, however you want to describe it. And then you can talk about the downtowns. And you had mentioned in the pre-discussion how the downtown core is just, it's not as vibrant. It's the culture downtown isn't great. And to be fair, we were walking around last night, some events after the apartment conference, and it was 5:00, so it was rush hour, and it was quiet. There's nobody on the streets. The streets, there's no traffic. Like we were comparing it to Toronto, downtown Toronto, like
a walk on the sidewalk.
Yeah, like you're like it's so packed. And so what is it? What do you see, and what is the solutions, and what is UDI doing to try to change that?
Well, UDI, a couple of years ago, we put together a brand new strategic plan, and for a long time, I think UDI was understood to be the Suburban Development Institute. And without a really, strong point of view on the full urban landscape. And as part of our strategic plan, we said, you know what, the number one thing that we have to put in here is that we're all in for downtown, and we need to stake a claim in this conversation, actually start calling out what is not working well and where our shortcomings are, and then to work, to the best of our ability with others. Now, it wasn't just a UDI thing. I think there was a groundswell of all of the business owners and many of the nonprofits and the post-secondaries and residents associations downtown who were also clamoring for something, and there was nothing to plug into. So a new coalition formed, which is called the Downtown Recovery Coalition, and it's been in operation for a couple of years now. And the number one thing to address is safety and security downtown. It's a problem. Cleanliness and just general upkeep. And then the third one is transformational projects. So how do we, it's not good enough to be clean and safe and not troublesome. We need to be attracting people to live here and to invest here. So I think it's a top concern, not only for the downtown community, but for the whole city and then for the city region. This is our capital city. And, we're in the most prosperous and arguably kind of quickly growing and forward thinking province in the country. And we are struggling. And there's a lot of reasons for it. To start off with, we weren't terribly strong. We had a lot of kind of vacant space in terms of surface parking lots to fill over time, which many Western prairie cities have to contend with. But COVID hit us hard, and then the social issues, largely I think precipitated by the opioid crisis, has hit us hard. So right now we need probably, I love walking on the sidewalks in Toronto. I love and hate that they're terrifying. You'll get jostled right off of them. You would never have that experience in Edmonton.
That's what you're saying.
Never.
Because the shady characters, quote unquote, however you want to describe that. Like there's lots of it in Toronto too, but the difference is you're on a sidewalk with 100 people.
That's right.
So you don't have it. The security issue is none. Like you assume you're faster than one of those people, so you're okay, right? Like,
yeah, that's
versus
right.
in Edmonton, you might be the only person on that sidewalk. So the shady character is a threat, or feels like a threat anyway.
Yeah, for sure. The density of people is like critical to that feeling of safety. And then of course we have underground LRT, which, there's entrances and egresses and pedways and tunnels. And there's lots of places where, we have to, be careful and think things through. But I think the province of Alberta really took this seriously, and they've deployed more. I mean, this, security measures are not the only way. They're kind of table stakes, but they're table stakes. So now we have more police presence. We have an actual, recovery centers is what's going to be happening for the opioid crisis. And then downtown we have a navigation center where folks experiencing homelessness or other problems can be redirected and get everything that they need to sort of help them along their way. So hopefully, at the very least, we've made some good progress on that dimension. But what the downtown actually needs is like double or triple the population.
That's what I was going to say. How do you attract the people? I mean, I get you clean it up and make it more secure. People are more likely to go downtown, but you need people to live and work and live and play in that space.
Yeah.
So is it a build it and they will come concept? Like, how does that work?
Well, I think we have some pretty cool opportunities that we can lean into. So Edmonton's downtown contains 3 major post-secondaries. MacEwan University, Norquest, and kind of a satellite of the University of Alberta. But around the Norquest MacEwan kind of nexus, they're only 3 or 4 blocks apart. And both of those schools are projecting massive population growth in terms of their student population. And so there is a critical opportunity there to build housing that, I won't say student housing or purpose-built student housing necessarily, but housing that students will live in. So, there is a demand, and there's different segments of the population who are going to be having a lot of demand to live in the core specifically. And Edmonton's downtown is also really quite large. It's not even almost fair to call it a downtown. It's weird that we're Edmonton in general is a fairly dispersed city, and our downtown is no exception. So we have a much larger downtown than Calgary does, for example, which really stretches things out and makes it more necessary to think about kind of nodes of activity. So we've got great action happening around our new hockey arena at Rogers. We have some great things happening along Jasper Avenue and our new Central Park that's under construction. And I think, one of the next big plays will be this idea of stitching together this sort of education district and matching the demand of the post-secondaries and the students with the supply of the apartment developers.
Students definitely add vibrancy to a neighborhood in numbers because they're not afraid to go out and mix it up in all the local restaurants and bars and all that. So it makes perfect sense.
Yep.
What are you most excited about for the next 5 years in Edmonton? We're going to shift to something a little more positive now that Darren's done being a jerk about the downtown.
You know what? It's great to be a jerk about the downtown and about everything. If we're not honest with ourselves, what are we even doing? I am so excited to see Alberta is at this tipping point of population. We were always sort of too small to, I don't want to say matter, but we just had small cities in a kind of dispersed province. And now suddenly, we've got a bit of swagger here. We have big cities that are getting bigger. We're attracting a lot of people from around the world. Our resource sectors are looking promising. and our agricultural sector is booming. So I think actually I'm really excited to see like what's going to happen when Alberta kind of tips into this fairly sophisticated, extra powerful urban place. And I think we have all the ingredients for that. And as we're, I'm glad that people are choosing Alberta, and I really want us to maintain that kind of go-getter kind of attitude that got us here, but also lean into thinking about, all right, like Canada's welcoming the country home. Alberta has a role to play, and cities are the welcome mat. So what are we going to do to roll out that welcome mat and make it a great place that people can thrive and where we can really grow our economy. So I think Alberta over the next 5 years is going to be kind of the place to watch. There's no doubt.
Well, when people talk about the various acronyms for the kind of cities that matter in Toronto, there's a bunch of variations on it. Obviously, the most restrictive would be, MTV, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver. But there is acronyms that include Edmonton, VECTOM. Yeah, there's acronyms that include Edmonton as, one of the most important cities in the country. So you're not wrong. In order to get to this vision you have of, where Edmonton could be, I mean, if I'm hearing the conversation right, is basically just continue exactly what you're doing. You continue this migration level, continue this development level. That will get you to the goal. Things don't necessarily need to change that much in order to get to that goal of a bigger, brighter, more vibrant city.
Yeah, I think our trick is going to have to be don't get in our own way. And there's going to be tons of temptations to do that, whether it's restricting growth, whether it's adding on more costs and charges to development, whether it's not investing in the infrastructure that we need, from schools to hospitals to highway interchanges. And we have been so good historically at ensuring that there's a great supply of land for new development. And that's part of the reason that we've been able to keep our costs so low for such a long time. So, it's kind of a boring answer to say just don't screw it up. But there are a lot of ways that we can screw this up. And right now, I would say my number one advocacy is like, let's not do that.
Don't get in our own way.
Do not get in our own way. Don't get too fancy. Don't think you have magic bullets that will solve all the world's problems. Like, just focus on grow the best locally you can, and from that you will have the global impact that you're hoping for. And I really hope that we can just stick to our principles and not get distracted by the shiny things that could actually erode the advantage that we fundamentally have.
Awesome. We're out of time. Kalen, thank you very much for taking the time. That was a pleasure speaking with you. I'd like to thank First National for powering the podcast. I'd like to thank Qualico Properties for sponsoring this episode of the video speaker series. And thanks again, Kalen, for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.